My name is Aaryan Menon. I'm currently in 12th grade, and my presentation is, as previously mentioned, the Orientalist fantasy Aladdin and its impacts on younger audiences. I specifically conducted a case study on the film, and then conducted correlative research to relate it to different studies on the topic of psychology and and younger audiences' understandings of race. So with that, we will continue. So for the introduction, Disney Studios has been a staple name in households and probably the largest name in Hollywood for decades. The studio has produced and released countless cinematic classics, both animated and motion picture. However, they're most notably remembered for their multiple children's films, which are created in partnership with their animation studio, Pixar. One of the most popular of these films is the 1992 animation Aladdin. Immediately after its release in 1992, it became a blockbuster hit. It raked in more than $19.2 million in its first week alone. In the United States, that film held the top spot 5 times weekly and broke the record for the week between Christmas and New Year's Eve with $32.2 million during its 22-week run, which is an exceptionally extended run for a movie of this sort. Aladdin was far and away the most successful film of 1992, grossing $217 million in the United States and over $504 million worldwide. It has since remained a classic movie and one of the major representations of the Middle East in American children's media. However, the film is in no way an accurate depiction. The film's vast cultural inconsistency and racist and sexist undertones have been more recently pointed out. The film has been viewed by millions of children across the world, and seeing as younger audiences may be more generally impressionable, this paper asks the question, does watching the film Aladdin negatively impact children's views on race? The question is essential to ask because there have been countless films with problematic aspects, and understanding their potential effects is essential in creating a better generation. I hypothesize that this film does, in fact, include very racial undertones, and that these undertones do impact children's views on race. As for my methodology, I conducted a case study to identify and outline a cause and effect relationship between racism in children's films and their conceived notions of race. To do so, I utilized the 1992 Disney animated film Aladdin as a primary source and outlined different forms of racism and colorism displayed throughout the film by sifting through its contents for the qualitative data. I specifically chose the movie Aladdin as it is the first media representation of the Middle East that many children have, and notably, it is probably one of my favorite Disney movies to date. I do recall very fondly watching as a child, but as I grew older, I started to realize that many of his aspects were largely problematic, which is why I believe this is so interesting to me. I believe it's important to identify a potential cause and effect relationship to understand how to progress our ability to accurately depict cultures in films. I also utilized secondary research in my paper, looking into multiple alternative papers to look for potential qualitative data proving that there is, in fact, a correlation between the representation of race in media and children's early conceived notions of race. So what is Aladdin? I'm sure many of you in the audience have watched the film. It is rather popular, but to summarize, the film depicts the story of a young Aladdin who is a poor man living on the streets of Agrabah, a fictional city located in the Middle East. In the markets of the city, he meets a princess, Jasmine, and the two fall in love and plan to escape the pressures of their lives together. Aladdin's pressures would be poverty within the city, and Jasmine's pressures would be her position in the royal family of Agrabah. The princess, however, is arranged to be wed to a prince. The Sultan, Jasmine's father, is being controlled by his advisor, Jafar, who is an evil sorcerer who arrests Aladdin and intends to overthrow the Sultan as well to obtain total control over Agrabah and its government. Through a series of fight scenes, musical numbers, and a magical genie, Jafar is defeated and the princess does marry the newly made prince, Aladdin. To introduce the film, the opening song was called Arabian Nights, and the song introduces the audience to Agrabah itself and the Middle East as well, while introducing many of the racist and stereotypical aspects of the movie. The song begins with a particularly small man with dark skin and a very large nose riding into the city on the back of a camel, singing the words, "Oh, I come from a land, it's a faraway place, where the caravan camels roam, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home." The lyrics immediately start out calling the city barbaric, illustrating the ideal that Arabia is very violent and that the people of the area will, quote, cut off your ear. They even go as far as identifying the region as barbaric, once again, relating the region and its culture as extremely violent and inhumane. Painting this image of a rudimentary and unforgiving city clearly indicates that there exists a strong prejudice against the Middle East and its cultures and societies. They additionally state that a fool off his guard can fall and fall hard. This once again perpetuates the stereotype of violence in the Middle East. Beyond the words of the song, there are countless characters portrayed in the streets of Agrabah to be aggressive and violent, once again asserting this racist ideal. The film's portrayal of different skin tones, as well as anything but coincidental. Throughout the film, characters have varying skin tones. However, the assignment of skin tones is consistently based on the character's traits and personalities. Princess Jasmine, for example, as seen in the image to the left, is a kind-hearted young woman who wants to help the people of the city. In the film, she is given light skin, as seen on the image to the left. Now, Jafar, in sharp contrast, is the main antagonist and has several notable evil traits, and he is given darker skin in comparison to Princess Jasmine and all other characters in the film. Now, while the difference is subtle, the specific scene where they're standing next to each other definitely highlights the difference in their skin tones. Now, Jafar is not the only bad character that's given dark skin. In fact, almost all characters that are seen to be violent also have dark skin. An example would be the royal guards of Agrabah, shown on the image to the right. Now, the royal guards were originally essentially the policing force in Agrabah. However, once Jafar began obtaining power in the government, he essentially used them to assist him in overthrowing the government. And comparatively to all the other characters in the film, they have darker skin. To no surprise, Disney made them darker for a reason, to specifically contrast their tendencies with the tendencies of the more innocent characters. And this intentional use of skin tone to equate darker skinned people with violence is a clear example of blatant colorism. Now, along with skin tone, the facial features of the characters are also used to contrast the traits of the characters once again. Now, the main protagonists, Jasmine and Aladdin, both have facial features that are heavily consistent with that of Eurocentric beauty standards. They both have large eyes, small noses, soft features, sharper jawlines, and small faces. In sharp contrast, the antagonists, both major and minor, have heavily enunciated facial features consistent with that of a caricature. Jafar, for example, has a disproportionately long, curved face with a large, jagged nose and enormous eyes. Additionally, on the previous slide, as you can see on the right, the royal guards also have disproportionate features that vary from guard to guard. This conveys a sense of racism, as beauty standards are utilized in displaying good and bad characters, making those that were violent have very disproportionate facial and physical features. If you can see on the image to the right, there are several characters with very wide faces with teeth missing, and all of them have very aggressive facial features altogether. Now, moving on to accents and casting, the use of accents is another troubling aspect of the film, and one that I really never noticed watching as a child. Notably, both Jasmine and Aladdin have no Middle Eastern accent at all and speak like a typical American may. However, Jafar, on the other hand, carries a very inaccurate attempt at an Arabian accent. Pairing an accent with an antagonist, and only the antagonist, can convey a point that those with Arab accents are, in and of themselves, inherently bad or evil. Throughout the entire list of characters in this film is Middle Eastern. However, there are absolutely no South Asian or Arab voice actors in the entire cast of the 1992 film. And this leads then to the lack of the accent in the protagonist, as well as the rationale as to why there was the incredibly poor accent in Jafar. Now, moving on to the main portion of this study, which is, do young children actually understand race? Now, this is a very interesting question, and one that we move to answer in this study. So it has been stated that there's a myth in popular culture that young children are colorblind, or they don't notice race. However, this understanding drives many to avoid conversations of race between themselves and their children. However, young children are in no way colorblind. According to a report, research clearly shows that children not only recognize race from a very young age, but also develop racial biases from ages 3 to 5 that do not necessarily resemble the racial attitudes of the adults in their lives. By age 4, children are able to distinguish different physical features between race, and by age 10, they're already grasping abstract traits and attributes among racial groups. Now, does media affect this understanding? Well, children often look to the world around them in order to establish personalized ideas regarding race and many other things among that. This means that they draw their conceptions from experiences and interactions at the school, the playground, store, park, from their home, or from a friend's house, among many things. And media plays a very large role in the development of children. In fact, according to an article written by Quetzal Lopez in 2020, media can serve as the first major window into the outside world for children, meaning films or shows that depict societies that the child is not personally a part of will serve as their initial baseline for those beliefs on the societies. In the article, she states children are capable of perceiving different races as early as birth, especially when growing up surrounded by the influences of media. Now, utilizing this evidence, it can be fairly stated that films such as Aladdin serve as a window into the Middle East, wrongly depicting the region and its cultures in an attempt to orientalize the film. The film's use of skin tone, facial features, accents, and many instances of extenuating stereotypes of violence in the Middle East, and they have become a blueprint for the children who view the region through the film. Now, this harmful effect can last a child's entire lifetime and is in fact damaging. Now, into our conclusion, it's been established that the film Aladdin has several aspects that can be deemed as racist or colorist, including their use of accents, skin tones, facial features, and even their casting. It's been also established that children can, in fact, hold conceived notions of race at a very young age, and the media does play a part in their subconscious understandings of race. These two understandings together answer the initial question and affirm my hypothesis that watching Aladdin very well does have the potential to impact children's ideas of race. To note a few limitations of the study, unfortunately, there was no way for me to specifically obtain the views of children who've watched this film for the first time. I believe that that would be a hole, you could say, in the study, and something that would be very interesting if somebody else were to pursue. Unfortunately, I personally do not have the mind of a child, so I cannot tell you exactly what children pick up from the film and what they don't, but it can be pointed out what is included in the film. And with that, that wraps up my presentation on the Orientalist fantasy Aladdin and its impacts on younger audiences. I'll take any questions at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think you can turn off the screen share now so we can, oh, geography.
Absolutely.
Okay, we can see you. All right, great. There was a great presentation, and I personally really enjoyed it. I think you really touch upon a really great topic, and since we have actually a longer time until the next presenter, we can have an extended discussion and taking any questions or comments on the floor. So do we have any questions from anyone?
Hi, I have just one question. I know you mentioned that you weren't able to kind of get any information about how Aladdin actually affects children. But I wonder, from perhaps your reading or just would you expect there to be a difference in the perception based on the race of the children themselves?
That is a very interesting question, and one that I was actually researching while writing this research. I believe that coming from a different area in the world and belonging to different ethnic groups does impact your perceptions of race, as you already have different mental schemas on what race means. And in other countries, the idea of race is more enunciated than others, as it is a social construct. For example, in one such as America, called a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities, in many instances, the race is a very large aspect of the culture here, as it does vary largely. But in countries where the ethnic groups are mainly homogenized, their concept of race may be limited or not talked about at all. And this definitely impacts the understandings that they obtain through the watching of films such as Aladdin.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That was really insightful.
Okay, do we have any follow-up questions for anyone? I actually have a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Yeah, so so I was mentioned I've recently seen the live action film when it came out a year or two before. Disney has been basically remaking live action of all the animated films when our generation watched in our childhood into live action ones. Partly because of obviously business strategy. They are all great intellectual properties for a corporation like Disney, but also they're also taking the chances to basically reinvent a lot of interpretations and fix many of the errors that now are problematic when we now look back. So have you seen the new live action one? Do you think it did better than the animated film?
I have watched the live action, and I really did like Will Smith's performance. However, it should be understood that it's not just the specific portrayal of the characters, it's the story itself. The story is adapted from real stories from the Middle East, and the movie or the film and the plot of the film is a heavily orientalized version of that. It creates the idea that women must be saved, as an example of Jasmine constantly struggling in her position in the royal family, as well as still portraying the cities of Agrabah to be violent. I think it's really interesting to talk about what Disney has changed. If any of you guys have Disney Plus, you may realize that at the end of many of these films, they also have disclaimers explaining that these, the animated films specifically, such as Dumbo, Peter Pan, The Lion King even, and Aladdin, do have very racist depictions, and they claim that it wasn't right then and it isn't right now. However, they're keeping it as is a very integral part of Disney's cinematic history. It's also interesting. I didn't know this until a little bit ago. Disney has also pulled these films from the children's category from Disney Plus, so they're no longer located in the children's category. You must navigate to them through different means on their platform, which is just another attempt at them trying to show that they have made mistakes in the past and they're trying to grow from it. But it should still be understood that many of their films, regardless, are orientalized versions of stories themselves.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I do recall there was a sequel to the animated film of Aladdin. Have you seen? I haven't seen that. Have you seen that? Is it any better, or it's still basically?
I haven't watched this.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard it was original story, so it wasn't come from any existing stories, and I suppose they probably did better in the sequel, but not many people have seen it. So okay, so do you have any other questions in the room?
Hi, me again. I was quite interested as to how watching Aladdin yourself as a kid, how that affected. Do you think it affected some of your perceptions on race and the Middle East?
Do you ask if watching the film affects my perception of the Middle East?
Yeah, as in just in retrospect, thinking back, how do you think it affected you?
I think it's difficult to look into retrospect, but I do recall that when I started watching it, I started relating myself with many of the characters, because for the first time in film, I started seeing characters with the same skin tone as mine. And that was a very large portion as to why the film was so important to me. But seeing the cities portrayed as violent, I started believing that these areas were essentially third world or realities that were outside our own, which potentially did have effects on my own development of racial schemas.
It's quite interesting. I think just because obviously we learn a lot about things now, but just looking back to our own past and seeing how things might have affected us.
Right. I think it is really interesting trying to understand how things have affected people in retrospect. Retrospect is really a difficult lens to look through, but if done right, there are some incredible conclusions that can be drawn.
Yeah, absolutely. So do we have any more questions coming up? Okay, great. Well, in that case, thank you so much for your presentation. Do you have anything you want to say in the end, or?
I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the platform to present my research. It's been a really great time developing this presentation, and I enjoyed sharing my findings with you. I also appreciate all the questions. They were very insightful, and I hope these discussions on race and their depictions can continue on in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate you waking up this early in the morning and give us this great presentation. It was really good. And your insight into this topic is really unique and something that is very important to the society of our own. Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.